Hi all, welcome to this, the next video in our segment looking at population geography, and in today's video we're going to look at the demographic transition model and we'll maybe spend a bit of time looking at population pyramids as well. So to get ourselves started with the demographic transition model, this is a graph that a lot of you will have already seen before, but it effectively just charts changes to birth and death rate and corresponding changes to total population. Now, a couple of caveats with this graph. It was a graph that was pulled together in the 1930s, and it's from a Eurocentric point of view. So it's based on European kind of progression and how a European nation, how its birth, death rate, and population has changed with time. It doesn't always apply to all parts of the world, but it is a good model that we can use to try and determine how different countries are progressing in their development by using their population as a marker of that. So if we start in stage one, the high stationary stage, this is where we're going to be looking at tribes of the Amazon and places like that. We've got a very high birth rate and a very high death rate. We've got the very high death rate because we don't have access to particularly effective healthcare, and if people are suffering illnesses and injuries, that wouldn't necessarily be a cause of death for ourselves. Things like breaking your arm or things like that. They very much could be a cause of death through infection and whatnot for people in this type of stage. We've also got things like uncertainty around food supply and things like that, which are going to have a big toll on death rate. Now, to combat that, the birth rate is kept high as well. So it's much like what we were talking about in the previous lesson in class, where if you've got particularly a high infant mortality rate, you've got a high birth rate to compensate for that. So because we know that lots of people in our population are dying, we're having lots of children to compensate for that. We're also in a position where access to contraception, etc. isn't particularly prevalent if it's available at all. So we don't have some of the things that would suppress the birth rate that we have today. You put both of those things together, the high birth rate and the high death rate effectively cancel one another out, and our population remains stable at quite a low total. We move through into our next stage, stage 2. This is the early expanding stage. For Europe, we're talking about the kind of turn of the Industrial Revolution here. So with this, we have got death rates starting to decrease. We're starting to see a big improvement in healthcare. We're starting to see hospitals become more effective. We're starting to see people be more aware of things like basic vaccination, and all of these kinds of things are occurring. But we've also got no change to birth rate yet. There's a bit of a lag time before people's behaviours change and they recognise that they don't need to keep having children to replace people who are not dying now, as the case may be. And we're still potentially in a position where having lots of children is seen as a benefit, potentially on an economic basis. So this is going to lead to a large natural increase. Our birth rate is far in excess of our death rate, so our population is going to start rising. And this continues into stage 3. Our death rate starts to slow in its decrease, but it's still decreasing. Medical advances, etc. are still being made. We're starting to hit a period in history where food supply is reasonably consistent. It's not something that most people need to worry about. Certainly not on a day-to-day basis, but birth rate is going to start to decrease as well. This is where we start to see things like women entering the workforce, women being granted better access to education, and this means that they are no longer solely focused on the classic women's role of having children and all this kind of stuff. They're having their own lives and their own careers and all the rest, which means they start to have children later, which, as we've talked about previously with the notion of a reproductive lifespan, if you have your first child at 25, 30, mathematically you will have fewer over the course of a reproductive lifespan than somebody who has their first child at 15, 20. So this sees our birth rate decline and it starts to drop off pretty dramatically. This means we've still got this natural increase because our birth rate is still in excess of our death rate, but the overall rate that population growth is going to start to taper off. We move into stage 4, and this is where most modern developed nations are at the present, the low stationary stage. So death rate has stabilised. We've kind of hit a point where most of the diseases that we can deal with, we are dealing with, but lacking kind of further medical advances, we've kind of hit a point where we can't beat death. It's still a thing. People still die of all sorts of diseases, and we're reaching a point where life expectancy is what we would consider reasonably normal, so it's kind of tapered off. Birth rates are starting to continue to drop and to level off at this stage because people obviously are still having children, but in stage 4 we'll start to see the rate that they're having children start to reach replacement level. So we're talking about each couple having, an average of 2 to 2.1 children each, which is going to level things off. Now this means our population in the early stages or the early portion of stage 4 is going to continue to rise a bit, but it's going to level off. The birth rate dropping down closer to that 2 means that we're going to start to hit a stable population. Now we go into stage 5. Now stage 5, in most diagrams you're going to see about this, stage 5 is like it is on the screen here, where you've got this question mark as it's this hypothetical stage. It's not really hypothetical anymore. We do have evidence of different nations who are in stage 5. Italy, Japan are a couple of examples that spring to mind, where we see birth rate actually dip below replacement level, where for a number of reasons we have people having fewer than 2 children. So it can be, lots of different things. Some as simple as they just decide that through the availability of contraception, etc., that they're going to have a child much later in life, and as such they're only capable of having 1 child. And that can also be married in with both of the members of a couple having careers, etc. Thus they want to start to have children later in life when they feel a little bit more financially stable. Because again, countries who are in stage 5, we're going to see things like child labour laws, all of these things that mean having a child is not an economic benefit, it is an economic burden, and that you have to pay to support that child. What is the impact of this going to be? Population is going to start to drop off. So we see the population start to decline, and this is something that we theorise. You would then start to see a kind of a fluctuation between stages 5 and 4. As countries then, governments, start to take steps to try and encourage countries to pick up the birth rate a bit, or we'd see things like Do It for Denmark, etc. And then they try and get it to a level where they have a reasonably stable population. As we've discussed in class, doing this is really difficult. Artificially managing how many children people have is really hard, and just as difficult as managing how many people die or not. We do our best with it, but there is a point at which you can't do any more. Now, I'm going to wrap the video up today. I was going to go on and talk a little bit about population pyramids, but we'll keep that for the next video when we'll start to look at some of the different population structures that we can have and how they marry into this model, and what some countries do to try to artificially alter their population model. So that's going to wrap things up here, guys. Now, remember, like, subscribe, and hit the notification button at the bottom, and I'll see you guys in class on Tuesday. Bye.